The clock on the wall was ancient. Its brass frame was tarnished, the glass face speckled with scratches. Yet, its ticking was precise. Unnervingly so. Every 60 seconds. Without fail. The long, slender second hand would sweep past the 12. And something would change. At first, it was subtle. So subtle that no one in the town of Gravens Hollow noticed. A missing stray dog. A cashier no longer at their post, a neighbor's house that seemed emptier than usual. It was Ann Whitaker, a retired librarian with a sharp eye for detail, who finally pieced it together. She kept a notebook in her cluttered living room, scribbling observations that no one else seemed to care about. One day, her entries stopped being about birds in the park or strange weather patterns. Instead, they became haunting. 8:01 a.m. Mr. Barlow's car is still in his driveway, but he hasn't picked up his morning paper. 8:02 a.m. Mr. Barlow's house is silent. Curtains drawn. Paper untouched. 8:03 a.m. No sign of Mr. Barlow. His dog is gone too. 9:15 a.m. The Blakely twins didn't show up for their piano lesson. Their teacher says they've been picked up early. No one knows by whom. 10:30 a.m. The butcher's shop is closed. Sign says back in 5, but it's been an hour. 11 a.m. I am sure of it now. Every minute, someone disappears. Anne tried to tell people. She stood in the town square, shouting her warnings to anyone who would listen. The clock is wrong, she'd yell. Not broken. Wrong. It's doing something to us. Most dismissed her as senile. Her outbursts ignored or laughed off. But those who humored her, who stopped to think about the missing faces, began to feel it too. Gravens Hollow was shrinking. When a dozen people vanished during Sunday service, the pastor declared it was the rapture. But if it was divine intervention, it didn't care about morality. The cruel, the kind, the young, the old. No one was spared. Families were shattered. Homes were abandoned mid-meal. Then came the broadcasts. Radios crackled to life. Televisions flickered despite disconnected cables. A single, chilling voice spoke. Every minute, one of you will be eliminated. No exceptions. No escape. It didn't explain why. It didn't offer a solution. It simply promised. Anne locked herself in her house, watching the clock. She had removed every other timekeeping device, even her wristwatch, convinced that ignorance of time might save her. But the ticking was inescapable. A drumbeat of doom. The town fell into chaos. People fled to the hills. But the disappearances followed them. Others gathered in the square, chanting prayers or screaming defiance. Some, like Anne, tried to wait it out in solitude. Nothing worked. And then, Anne noticed something else. At 11:47 p.m., she sat in her living room, trembling as the second hand crawled toward the 12. When it struck, nothing happened. No one vanished. For the first time in weeks, the clock was silent. But the reprieve lasted only a moment. When the hand struck 12 again, Anne wasn't sure what she had heard. A voice? A whisper? But the sense of wrongness was palpable. The disappearances resumed. But now they were faster. 30 seconds. Then 20. It was accelerating. Desperate. Anne grabbed her notebook, flipping back through her entries. The first disappearance had been a dog. The Wilsons' old lab. She remembered now how much she had disliked that dog. How its barking had ruined her morning walks. Had she wished it gone? Anne's pen hovered over the page. The thought formed unbidden, and she gasped. She had hated that dog. Yes. But had she willed it to disappear? If so, was it possible the clock was not an agent of destruction but a servant? A grim, obedient servant. She scribbled a test. Let the clock stop. Let no more vanish. She sat by the clock, staring at her note, willing the second hand to freeze. But it ticked on, unrelenting. She tried again. And again? Her mind raced. What if the clock didn't take orders? What if it only responded to her subconscious? The next tick claimed another person. And another. Anne began to cry. By morning, Graven's Hollow was a ghost town. Buildings stood intact. But the town square was empty. The streets devoid of life. Only Anne remained. She wandered through the silence, her notebook clutched to her chest. And then she heard the ticking. Not from the clock in her living room. It was everywhere, resonating from the very air around her. Her final thought was not one of terror, but of guilt. At the edge of Graven's Hollow, the brass clock glinted in the morning sun. Its second hand swept past the 12. And Anne Whitaker was no more. The clock kept ticking. Somewhere else, a child opened their eyes to a strange brass clock mounted on the wall of their bedroom. The cycle began again.